Hello and welcome to the Cloud Gaming Report, your weekly news source for everything going on in the world of cloud gaming. I'm Zach, and in this week's episode, we're going to launch by kicking off a discussion on Google's possible cloud gaming platform. So this was rumored earlier this year, I think in February, and the codename for this project is Yeti. And before we even begin this discussion, I just wanted to mention that Google is known for launching multiple different projects, and a lot of those projects being killed later on down the road. They're kind of notorious for that. So we might actually never see this project actually see the light of day, but it's a very interesting article that I wanted to discuss. So the reason why this is actually being brought up again, even though there's still very little information on it, is because we recently had GDC, which is the Game Developer Conference, and even more recent E3, and a lot of rumors have leaked from those conferences where Google has been talking to developers and developer studios on possibly getting those on their new platform and possibly even acquiring some development studios to have first-party titles. So I did have some thoughts and general discussions on that. I don't know if acquiring studios is exactly the route that Google needs to go. In the modern era, I don't think exclusives is going to be a huge thing. While they are certainly cool, I don't know if they're the way to really push a platform forward. They're more of an antiquated way of thinking, I think. More where that work really well for consoles and hardware. If you're building a platform that is on the PC, you're going to have a vast array of games available to play on your platform. And I think that maybe their focus should be on possibly unique features that they can bring that other providers can't bring. So for example, if you look at Parsec, one of their unique features and drawing points of Parsec is the fact that they offer co-play, where multiple people can connect to a single cloud server or even a computer running in your house if you do have a very good upload speed, and play local multiplayer games. And this is something that used to be a huge thing back in the day of playing local multiplayer games on consoles, and as the consoles started to phase those out, possibly due to consoles not being able to simply display 4 different camera angles as the games got more and more intensive, that has kind of faded away in the console scene, and has been something that's kind of popped up more in like indie games especially. I don't see too many like AAA games implementing it on computer, but a lot of indie games are focusing or at least having a feature where local multiplayer is a good aspect or a cool added feature of the game. So I don't know if acquiring game development studios to have first-party titles is really how Google should move forward. I think it's more on unique features. So, for example, on the Xbox, I mainly use it as a media center to play Netflix, Prime videos and stuff on my TV, more as a game console. But the one game that I do play is Madden. And a cool feature that it has is if I do, have an awesome play where I score a 70-yard touchdown or something like that, it'll automatically, make a clip of that, which is like 30-second clip of the gameplay, and I can share that with people. So one thing that Google could do, since they also own YouTube, is they could very easily allow you to connect your cloud gaming platform to YouTube, and you could have those clips automatically sent to your YouTube channel, and maybe even be unlisted, and then you can just share the links with people, or possibly even be public right off the bat, so people could kind of have like a Twitter feed possibly of highlights from the games that you're playing. So that might not be a super awesome idea and might not be something that a lot of people would use. But another thing that is kind of difficult right now, or it's not really difficult, it's just kind of a backwards way of doing it, or you have to kind of do a couple extra steps to do it. It's much more challenging than doing it local with streaming from the cloud. So with these cloud computers, you usually have a lot of processing power, and you definitely have some spare CPU cycles in many cases where you could dedicate that to streaming straight from the cloud. Where things get challenging is incorporating a webcam into your cloud stream. So if you want to incorporate your mic and your webcam, sometimes those are challenging depending on if you have a USB mic or an analog mic, and your webcam is sometimes challenging. You usually have to use like a chat program or a USB over network. The USB over network tools usually don't work great because it's simply trying to stream your USB signal of your webcam over the network, and that's usually uncompressed, so it usually takes a lot of data and you'll get choppy video. So there's not really a great way. And this is where, since Google owns both YouTube and this cloud gaming platform and a ton of cloud computing possibilities, they could do a unique feature where, like, Microsoft is opening up games to have cloud computing in the background, such as Crackdown 3, which is going to do some physics simulations on cloud computing servers so that your local console doesn't have to deal with that. So where Google could incorporate this is essentially have a separate server that kind of is a streaming encoding server for their users. And this is another feature not everybody's going to use, but a lot of people do like streaming, and possibly they might just have a private stream for some friends to join to if this was super easy to do. So imagine if you could simply plug in a USB webcam and a mic to their local hardware, whatever that is, and I will talk about that a little bit here in a bit, but you just plug those local peripherals or local accessories into their local device, and you could have like a web portal to have like an OBS like infrastructure where you have an OBS software where you can take your video stream straight from the cloud, and that is already being encoded so they can send it to your computer. So they simply set that and send that stream also to your web portal. So you could put your normal, your game in the background, and then you could put your overlays, whatever overlays you have, and then you can set up your webcam stream and all that, and you can kind of set all that up through a web portal, and you can stream that straight to YouTube from there. And that would be an interesting way to use cloud gaming and also incorporate a unique feature. Since Google owns YouTube, they could really tightly integrate all that together, and then they could easily do features where Mixer is doing, where they could offer interactive streaming. And this is something I've been wanting to research deeper, but they could really offer interactive streaming in conjunction with this, because they're really integrated with YouTube since they own it. So they could kind of mesh these three ideals together, where you could cloud stream, they own YouTube, and they could add interactive streaming features together to have a really unique feature that really only Google would be poised to do very easily, because the other options out there, like Amazon, as far as I know, they're not working on a streaming service. And Microsoft might be trying to do something, since they're in a similar boat. They do own Mixer, and they own, of course, the Azure databases. So they might be trying to go to something similar, where their cloud streaming platform might possibly have direct integration to Mixer. I haven't looked at this too close in the Xbox, but I think from the Xbox you can stream directly to Mixer, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So with all that in mind, they could have a system where they could really tightly integrate some of the services that they own, their general cloud computing, services for a streaming server, their new cloud gaming service, and YouTube, and kind of integrate those three services together in a really cool, unique manner. Now moving on to their hardware, because I did briefly mention that. There is very little information on this, but I would personally expect it to be a low-end hardware device like the Shadow Box, simply because it doesn't make a lot of sense to really compete in the higher end console market, because you already have Sony and Microsoft there competing very heavily on the more higher end side, and you have Nintendo on the more portable side with the Nintendo Switch. So you already have three pretty large and pretty well established companies fighting over this higher end devices where you don't really have to utilize cloud computing power. And that's why I personally see Google going the route of Shadow and having a low-end device like the Shadow Box for the local device, and then having all the power being done in the cloud, and not going the route of where like Microsoft is currently, where they are using some cloud computing power for more complex operations such as physics operations, but still having most of the processing power being done on the local devices. I imagine Google will have everything done in the cloud, and it'll work just like the Shadow Box, where you essentially have to render the image that has been streamed from your cloud server. And the article, the final point I wanted to bring up about the Google Cloud Gaming Platform, and another way that they can integrate services that Google, or rather Alphabet in general, owns, is the source article on Kotaku. I probably completely butchered that name. But anyways, the source article Brings up the biggest challenge will be data caps and broadband infrastructure and general just internet availability, especially in rural areas. And they also bring up that this is something that Google was working on with Google Fiber, but it is highly limited. So here I wanted to bring up WebPass, which is a company that Google acquired at least a year ago. And WebPass focuses on gigabit internet, but it is available through the wireless spectrum instead of having to run a fiber line to every single home and every single business. They use wireless gigabit to provide very fast internet with low latency, not quite as low latency as a dedicated fiber line run to your house, but fairly low latency in the grand scheme of things, especially considered the latency you normally get over a DSL connection anyways. So with all that in mind, where Google could really kind of take their kind of grand scheme of things of everything that Google does and does well, they could set up essentially regional data centers with a focus on cloud computing for gaming purposes and offer regional game computing data center endpoints. So what this could do is essentially you have a regional data centers. For example, Google Fiber operates a regional hub for their fiber services in Kansas City, and they also have expanded their fiber services to regional or to towns outside of that metropolitan area. Instead of outside of the Kansas City downtown area, they also offer services, I think, in Independence. They offer services in Lee Summit, I know. So there's other towns that are kind of somewhat connected to Kansas City, but still distance-wise a decent ways away. So these regional hubs could offer a very low latency connection to your cloud computing service. And they don't necessarily have to have a server for every single individual that wants to utilize cloud gaming, but this could offer a solution for one of the biggest problems that cloud gaming faces is the latency that is induced by the network itself. So the biggest issue here is software developers such as Parsec and Shadow have worked on their compression algorithm so that they can compress and decompress or encode and decode that video stream with very little added latency. We're talking about 1, maybe 2 frames total between encoding and decoding, and pretty much all the latency right now is in the network and getting the packets from the server to your local computer. And that's going to be the biggest factor that we hit the face now. By having regional data centers, and this is something that Google could probably do very easily simply because they are working on infrastructure with the acquisition of both WebPass as well as Google Fiber, and they already have kind of regional hubs set up where you'll be very close distance speaking to that hub. And maybe this could be a premium tier of their service where you are guaranteed access to the regional hub. And if that regional hub is full, if you have the lower tier, you fall back to their traditional and larger scale data centers where you would run off of those, and you might have added latency. But if you are willing to pay the premium tier, you have a dedicated connection that is at your regional location where you're talking about maybe 5 milliseconds of added latency. So we're talking about less than 20 milliseconds latency total between sending your packets to the data center, all that your actions being performed on the server, that those actions and the video stream being encoded and sent back to your local computer and decoded on your computer and actually displayed on your screen. So if you could get that down to say 3 frames total of latency between your actions actually being performed, your mouse click actually being clicked, or you hitting the W key or the space bar or whatever, and all that getting back to you in very low latency, it'll be essentially having a high-end gaming computer in your house that is always upgraded magically. You don't have to upgrade it. It's just one day you walk in and it has a better CPU, or one day you walk in and it has a better GPU. And that is something that I could see as a very strong vision in the future of cloud gaming, and it's something that Google could do possibly unique. Now, all this is just theory crafting, and Google might never actually do any of these things, but it's these unique features that Google kind of already has services somewhat established for that they could offer as a unique feature rather than focusing on acquiring development studios. Because if you're making a PC-based or a Windows-based streaming platform, you already have a ton of games available to you, and focusing on acquiring development studios for first-party titles is kind of old school mentality thinking, in my opinion. and going the route of kind of integrating services that Google, or rather Alphabet as a whole, kind of already has established, and integrating those services in a very tight-knit platform could be a huge move for the cloud gaming, cloud gamers in general that want a very low latency connection, and could solve one of the issues that we have right now, where the biggest challenges that people are facing is having data centers and continuing to roll those out. Now, for casual gamers like me, having that extra 25 seconds of milliseconds latency by having to connect to a data center that might be 700 miles away versus one that's only 50 miles away isn't a big deal. For more competitive people, they're going to want a very low latency connection, and you could actually offer that as a unique feature here, and it could actually have another revenue for Google to really push their internet services, such as something that they're going to offer through WebPass. So very cool way to possibly integrate all the services that Alphabet in general owns, and really provide a very unique platform for Google. They might simply do an old school mentality thing where they'll just utilize their data centers that they already have and try to push first party games, but I definitely don't think that is a route that Google should go. But I'm just one guy with a YouTube channel, but anyways, I just want to share some of my thoughts on this, because there isn't a lot of cold hard facts at this point in time. It's mostly just rumors. They are talking to development studios, and that's the biggest thing that we have to talk about. There's very little information on the hardware, and we have the code name of Yeti at this point in time. So there isn't a lot of hard facts. So that's why I kind of want to go on this kind of route of theory crafting on what Google could do with their platform through the services that they also own through their Alphabet parent company. So anyways, from there, I also wanted to talk about the Paperspace price increases. We talked quite a bit about Google's platform, but the main other topic that we had this week, and there's not a lot going on outside of those two topics, even though I somehow talked for about 15 minutes or so about Google's platform. But the other thing we have to talk about this week is Paperspace and their price increases. So this is kind of sad news, because Paperspace has kind of been the high-end option for people that are looking for a lot of power from their cloud gaming platform, but also a cheap option for people that aren't as hardcore and might only game 20 to 30 hours a month. This was a very cheap way to utilize cloud gaming. And some of these price increases aren't too drastic, but they do add up, especially the storage cost if you have a higher volumes of storage. But we'll get to those here in a second. So the P4000 or the GPU Plus, if you still have that, the GPU Plus is being phased out in favor of the P4000. But anyways, that is going from 45 cents an hour to 51 cents an hour. That is a 13% increase. The P5000 is going from 65 cents an hour to 78 cents an hour, which is a 20% price increase. The P6000 is going to 90 cents per hour to $1.10 per hour, which is a 22% increase. So the least increase here is the P4000, which is it is the budget option, and it does very well in a lot of the benchmarks. The P5000 is just a little bit better, and I rarely actually test with the P6000 because it's kind of at the point where it is pretty expensive and doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That's actually why I don't really test on Amazon's options, because unless you're using the spot pricing, which has some challenges of its own, but unless you're using spot pricing, it's very, very expensive. And the biggest part of that is Amazon has kind of generic tiers where to get to the higher tier GPUs, you also have a ton of RAM. I think it's like 60 gigs of RAM, which no game actually even comes close to needing. So with all that in mind, you're kind of paying for some resources that you don't need just to get to a certain tier on the GPU side to have a great, streaming option. So by having the price increase on the P6000, it's becoming less feasible in my mind, unless you do just have a ton of money. And then if you do, I do have a Patreon. But anyways, guys, I digress. We're going to go ahead and move on to the storage part. It is kind of sad to see the price increases, especially when companies like Shadow recently actually had a price decrease. This does make me wonder if, and actually Liquid Sky recently had a price increase too. Theirs were even more drastic than Paperspace. So comparatively, Paperspace is very generous in their price increases, but it is sad to see price increases occur. But it does make me wonder how sustainable Shadow's pricing will be, if we'll see it actually end up with a price increase in the future rather than a price decrease to possibly roll back the price decrease in the future. We'll just have to wait and see. But it might still be something that's kind of possible with the way that they're selling their services. So it'll be interesting to see how all this shakes out in the future. So moving on from there, we have the price increases for storage, which is where things are going to possibly hurt, especially if you have the higher volumes of storage. So for 50 gigabytes, it's going to stay at $5, but this was a tier that never made a lot of sense to me, because for $2 more, you used to be able to upgrade to the 250 gigabyte plan, which used to be $7 per month. But the 50 gigabyte plan is at $5 and it's staying at $5, so no price increase at all. The 100 gigabyte plan is going from $6 to $7. Not too bad, but not great either. And the 250 gigabyte plan is going from $7 to $10, which is a $3 price increase, which is actually, what is that, about a 40% price increase, which is actually a pretty steep price increase. I normally use the 250 gigabyte plan because there are larger games, and that does allow you to have about 3 to 4 games installed at the same time as Windows, and also to record some footage locally if you want to, just to possibly upload it to YouTube at a later date, or to sync to your local computer through Dropbox or OneDrive. But anyways, the 250 gigabyte is still fairly reasonable, especially if you look at the pricing comparison between Amazon's AWS and its S3 pricing. It is still very competitive there, comparatively. And some of these price increases are pricing because, in part, they're not focusing just on cloud gaming like Shadow is and Liquid Sky is. They're focusing on general computing performance. They have machine learning machine tiers. They also just have some general compute machine tiers too that don't really have a very powerful dedicated GPU. So they're not focusing on cloud gaming. That's just one of the aspects that their machines do very well. So we're seeing some price increases because they're not directly competing with companies like Shadow, which recently had the price decrease, which I was talking about. So they're not in the same competitive mindset. And comparatively to Amazon, for the power that you get, you still have a very cheap option with Paperspace, and that's really who they're competing against, is companies like like Amazon's AWS and Microsoft's Azure and even Google's data center. Those are giants in the market compared to Paperspace itself, but comparatively, they're still cheap compared to some of those other options out there on the market. Where things get really expensive though, and the price increases are really crazy, is the higher storage capacities. So the 50, the 100, and 250 gigabyte plans, well, the 50 gigabyte is staying the same, but the 100 and 250 are seeing some price increases, but they're still fairly reasonable. Where things get even more expensive is the higher capacity storage. The 500 gigabyte is going from $10 to $25. The 1 terabyte is going from $20 to $55. And the 2 terabyte is going from $40 to $120 per month. So that is a massive price increases for those 3 tiers. The 250 gigabyte is what I've always used, and if I always try to recommend it, I don't know if I've always recommended it 250 gig, but it is the one that I always use on my cloud VMs. There is one that I use on the 100 gigabyte simply because I don't use it as much, but for the most part I use the 250 gigabyte. So I'm going to see probably like a $9 price increase on my monthly pricing just on storage, which is going to be sad. But it's something I'm willing to pay to continue to test Paperspace in general. So that kind of covers all the Paperspace price increases. Some of the aspects aren't too bad, but if you have high capacity storage, then you're going to see a massive price increase. And I would personally recommend downstepping to a lower storage, which would mean you need to recreate your VM, which is going to be added time to reset up Steam and all that. So it is going to be a little bit of a hassle, but it's better than paying $15 extra a month just for 250 gigabytes of storage. And that's something that's kind of weird about it, is if you take the price of the 250 gigabytes, which is going to be $10, and double it for the 500 gigabyte, it's only $20. But if you actually want 500 gigabytes of storage, it's actually $25. So it's kind of like the reverse of volume discounts. The more you want, you actually have to pay a little bit extra for the added capacity. Another example is the 1 terabyte is $55. The 2 terabyte is $120. So the 55 times 2 is $110. You're actually paying $10 extra comparatively for the extra terabyte of storage, just to have it as one big lump sum. So sad to see some price increases, but the main thing here is it's because Paperspace is not directly competing with companies like Shadow or Liquid Sky. It's competing against the big, huge guys out in the market, such as Amazon's AWS and Microsoft's Azure. So that pretty much covers all the topics this week. There's only 2 things to talk about, but somehow I talked for over 24 minutes. So thanks for everybody that have stuck along for this long. I hope this talk was thought-provoking. Hopefully it got some of your minds thinking. There's a lot of cool things that Google could do with the companies that their parent company Alphabet owns. I'll be very excited to see if anything ever actually comes from Google's project. A lot of times they do kill projects, so it would be sad to see that happen. And hopefully we don't just see a generic cookie cutter cloud streaming platform with a couple first-party exclusive titles from Google. I really hope that's not the route they go, because they have the services out there to really make a tight-knit service that would be very unique. And hopefully they go that route rather than just making a cookie cutter with a couple first-party exclusives. So thanks for watching, guys. If you found this week's episode enjoyable and maybe it made you think a little bit or gave you cool ideas about the future of cloud gaming, make sure you give this a big like or a heart, depending on what the choice is on the platform that you're listening to this podcast, whether that be your podcast, your favorite podcasting app, or just on YouTube. Also, if you're not already subscribed or to this podcast, or whether that be on YouTube once again or to your podcast platform, make sure you hit that button to subscribe, whatever that button actually is. So thanks for watching or listening, guys. I hope you enjoy this podcast. If you do, make sure to hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Provoking Tech. So once again, guys, thanks for listening or watching, and until next time, Zach out.